Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the very last talk sessions for the day of day one of PyCon. I hope you've all had an excellent day. And don't forget, after this, at 5:40 p.m., there's going to be the lightning talks downstairs in 517 A and B, and be sure not to miss them. So, we're about to hear Sarina Canelake from edX talk about internationalization. World domination the easy way. So take it away, Sarina.
Hello, everybody. I'm here today to talk to you about world domination. The most simple course of action is through I18N and L10N. So who am I? My name is Sarina Canelake. I am a software engineer at edX. edX is a company that provides free online courses from the best universities around the world. And our site is run in English, but we actually offer 5 different language experiences for our users. Additionally, our software is open source, and our open source community is running our software in 20 different languages. So over the course of the past 2 years, we've been working on a lot of internationalization and localization problems. And I'm here today to talk to you not just about internationalization, but about the localization step as well, and some common things that we've learned. So in this talk today, we're going to talk about the basics, how you go about presenting your project in a new language, and how you can help your open source community by better internationalizing your website, and how you can work with crowdsourced translators to get some good translations. So some background. Internationalization or I18N stands for internationalization. It's convenient shorthand. It's I plus 18 letters plus N. It's the engineering work that we do as software engineers to indicate which parts of our application are user-facing and require translation. Internationalization is only performed one time. Ideally, it's as part of integrated feature development work. So just as you would write unit tests for your work, so you would internationalize your user-facing strings. Localization, L10N, L plus 10 letters plus N, is the work to actually present your application to a different audience. Localization is performed multiple times, at least once per every specific region. So you might localize for French, and then decide to tackle Chinese, then decide to tackle Arabic. The advantages of internationalizing your work is, pretty obvious. You want to increase the reach of your software. But what if your project's not at that point yet? Well, I can tell you from rough experience that doing internationalization up front will save you a lot of headache down the road if and when you do decide to localize your app. Imagine having to crawl all the dusty corners of code you wrote 4 years ago trying to find that last user-facing string. It's much easier if you can integrate internationalization into part of your development work. Also, if you're an open source project, internationalization is going to be really, really key to helping your open source community adopt your project. At edX, our software is, like I said, used around the world, and it's often used in languages and locales that we don't have live on our website. For example, on edX.org, we don't host Arabic, but there are at least 2 full-fledged Arabic installations of our software, and they were able to use the internationalization work that we had done up front to provide an Arabic use of our software. So how does it all work? The localization pipeline is actually pretty simple. There are only 4 steps. The first step is the internationalization step. We mark our user-facing strings to indicate that they need translation. So let's say we have a little bit of Python code like this. Just for reference, I'm going to be using examples from Django and Python 2, but the lessons are applicable for not just any Django project, but any Python project and any language project. The syntax might be a little bit different. That's about it. So to internationalize this, we want to say that string hello needs to be translated. So we do a couple of things. We import a translation function. This function is called getText. In Python 2, we want to import uGetText. That U prefix stands for Unicode. We're going to alias it as underscore. I'm not sure why this is done, but it's a pretty common convention. I've seen it throughout PHP code and other language code. Then we're going to use this underscore function to wrap our string hello to indicate this is a string that needs translation. That's it. We are done internationalizing. Second step is that we need to scrape the strings. We statically run through all of our code and we say what strings need to be what strings need to be translated. In Django, there's a really nifty command that will scrape all your Python files and all your Django templates and collect them into what's known as a PO file. A PO file is going to look like this. It has where the source line came from. It's the key, the message ID, is the string that we scraped, and the value is its translated value. In our source PO file, we don't have a value because it wouldn't really make sense to translate English into English. Step 3 is translating the strings, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. At edX, we use a website called Transifex. Transifex provides free accounts to open source projects and allows crowdsourced translators to come and translate for free. This has been really great for our project because there are many users of our software who want to contribute to Open edX, but may not be technically inclined, don't know how to code to contribute. And they can contribute translations, and that's a really big help to our project. So once you have the translated PO file, you can download it, and it'll look something like this. So now we have a key that is hello, and a value that is bonjour for our French PO file. These PO files act kind of just like a Python dictionary. So I'm saying key and value because the message ID string, that's the key. We look up, say, what's the translation value for this key? The final step is that we need to serve our strings. First, I'm glossing over how you set up your website to serve translations. Django provides some middleware. It's quite easy to set up. Once you have that set up, you compile your PO files to MO files. Django provides us with a really nifty function to do just that. And now we get to runtime. At runtime, when a user who requests to see your website in another language encounters the line of code that says hello, what happens? This underscore function goes and looks up in the MO file and says, what's the value that you have for hello? Please give it to me. But if you don't have a value, just return what I put in. So it's essentially like a Python safe dictionary lookup. And that's important because what it means is that if your translation files are not complete, your application won't break. You will always serve some string even if you don't have a translated value. So that's it. Mark, scrape, translate, serve. And that's the localization pipeline. But there's always a caveat. The first 3 steps that I said, the scrape, internationalize, scrape, and translate, they all happen before your application ever runs. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that this underscore function, this getText function, serves 2 purposes depending on what part of the pipeline you're in. The beginning of the pipeline, this is simply a lexical marker. It's just saying, I want to translate this string. It's not until runtime that this actually becomes an executed function call. This is important when we get into more complicated strings. So let's look at this string. This string isn't just hello. We're actually formatting this string, inserting the user's name into it. So how do we internationalize this? Well, the simple way to do it is to just wrap the underscore function around that. But here's a problem. The problem here is that when we do the static scraping of this, that format's not going to be executed. That format's not executed until runtime. So what's the key in our PO file? The key is just going to be hello, brace, name, brace, exclamation point. But what's going to happen at runtime? Let's say Susan visits your website and she wants to see the site in French. Her username is Susan. And so when she hits this line of code, first the string is going to be defined, and then the dot format is going to be executed. And then the getText function is going to look up in the MO file, hello Susan. Do we have a key of hello Susan? Is it reasonable to have a key of hello Susan? To have a key in your PO file for every single user of your site? That's not what we want to do. So what we want to do is we want to make sure when we're internationalizing, we mark up just the string to be internationalized. So here, in the lexical marker phase, we're still going to scrape the exact same thing, hello variable name. But what happens at runtime? At runtime, we say hello name. Now we look that up in our MO file to get back the value bonjour name. And then the dot format is executed to give us bonjour Susan. And that's the string our user sees. So I talked a little bit about what Django provides to support internationalization. Let's look a little bit more at those tools. The Django I18N docs are fabulous. They're very, very readable, and I encourage you to check them out. Matt Croydon gave a talk at PyCon a few years ago that goes a little bit more into depth to not just the getText function, many of the other functions that Django provides. His talk's only slightly out of date, and so you might want to read the Django docs after you watch that talk to get some of the more up-to-date functions. So what happens if your application is more than just basic Django? You have people who want to provide Mako templates, underscore templates, CoffeeScript, JavaScript, etc. There are a lot of wonderful packages that exist out there to help you deal with this. At edX, we've written a collection of scripts that help us tool our internationalization. It handles all sorts of various file types. It handles segmenting the PO files. Your PO files are these giant monolithic files for your entire app, and sometimes when you're giving translators the file, you'd like to segment them a little bit more finely along different app boundaries. We also generate a dummy language for testing. What this means is that if you're trying to say, did I internationalize this properly? When I go to localize this, will this string actually show up in another language? A dummy language will translate into the dummy language, which just looks like English, but it's totally accented. So you can actually test that the pipeline is working properly. So now we know what we do on the engineering side. What is about that third step, that translation step, that many of us really have no idea how that happens? As I mentioned, we use transifex, and our open source translators often are non-technical users, and they may not have seen the entire application. And this is probably true for many open source projects. You probably have corners of your app that are only visible by certain users. So what this means when you are marking strings for translation, and you don't provide context to the strings, your translators are going to be helpless. Let's look at this. This is a real string from the application I work on that we are asking translators to translate. And I have really no idea what this means. Particularly, we use this weird positional variable here that could be an adjective or a number or all sorts of things. And certain languages that have gendered nouns and different orders of numbers versus adjectives may have a really difficult time translating this. So how can we provide more context? Here's a better string. This string is great for two reasons. It provides a named variable, so we know that we're looking at a username for the variable, not an email address or a user ID. And we also provide a little bit more context to the string. So the developer's note gives the translators the opportunity to say, or the developer has an opportunity to say, hey, translators, here's where this string is used. Here's how I'm going to use it, so that they can have the full context of your website when they go to translate the string. So let's look at some pro tips that we can use to internationalize better for our open source translators. Basic rules, use dot format instead of string interpolation. We know that %s and %d means string and digit interpolation, but that's crazy. We shouldn't expect our translators to know that. Moreover, dot format is really awesome and super safe, so if you're not using it for your strings, I'm not sure why not. Use named and not positional variables. So user as a variable name is way better than empty curly braces or 0. And add translators comments, and there is a syntax for this for different types of files to provide a little bit more context for your translators. So here's an example of some code that follows all of those awesome tips. We provide a translator's comment. We internationalize the string. We give a great variable name. We use dot format after the return from getText. Here's another reason why we should use named variables. Not only is this string not giving us a lot of context, like what are those empty braces intending to mean? If I tell you these braces mean month and day, what kind of bells does that ring for you? Yeah, in other languages, in American English, we say April 10th, but in many other languages, they would say in the 10th of April. So using named variables allows variable reordering. The biggest tip that I can give you is to keep your phrases together. The smallest unit of text you should ever be translating is full sentence or phrase. So look at here, this programmer has no idea what they're doing, and they've concatenated that is a plus the color of a car plus the phrase car. So in English, this is going to be awesome. That is a blue car. But who in here speaks French and, and is laughing at that one? Because that's totally wrong in French. In French, the adjective comes after the noun, not before. So if you keep the phrase together and you internationalize and then use the dot format to just plug in the variable that you need, translators can reorder the sentence according to the needs of their language. Plurals are another big issue. And thankfully, there's a really excellent standard function for this. It's called ngettext. It's imported from the standard library. And unlike gettext, we never alias this. We always use this explicitly as ngettext. And because we always want to make sure that everything's in Unicode, we import the Unicode prefix ngettext. We use this function. It's a pretty basic function call. For an English source code, you provide it 3 arguments. The first argument is the English singular version of your sentence or phrase. The second argument is the plural version. And the third version is the number that causes you to decide if you're displaying the singular or the plural. So here we have there is num file, there are num files, and we're going to switch on the number of files. Now, we want to plug in that number variable, so then we use the dot format after we return from the ngettext call. How ngettext works is actually very cool. It's cool source code to dig around in. And tools like transifex display a pretty awesome display to the user. So here's an ngettext string. This is the translator view. So the top part is the English source string. And you see there's a toggle there to show the singular and the plural version of this string. Arabic has 6 plural forms. So you can see here the Arabic translator is asked to provide all 6 plural forms before they can move on with the translation. And ngettext has some cool machinery to decide which plural to choose for which language. So looking at this example, this is code I see a lot, and it seems pretty reasonable. If the number of tags is greater than 2, we want to display this string. And the string's always going to be plural, right? So we can just internationalize it this way. But this isn't going to work for languages like Arabic that have 6 plural forms, or languages that have crazy plurals, like look up Polish and a lot of other Eastern European languages where it depends on the final digit. So the safest road to go is that even when you think this is always going to be a plural string in English, is to always use ngettext so that you can account for all kinds of different users and locales. A quick tip that we've learned is we remove as best as we can the HTML from all strings. I said in the beginning that if you're doing crowdsourced translations, your translators really may not be technical. They may not semantically understand the meaning of HTML strings. A tool like transifex does provide validation that all the strings are there and in a non-breaking order. It doesn't necessarily say that if you have tags around a specific string, or you have classes on your paragraph tag, or you have an href that's this really long URL, that the translators haven't changed those things. So the safest course of action is just to remove HTML. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. Here's a pretty basic way. We want to translate this welcome phrase. And so let's just translate the word welcome and concatenate the emphasis tags around that. Remember that the getText function, uGetText, is always going to return a Unicode object. So we want to make sure that we're preserving the Unicode sandwich by making sure that the concatenated objects are always Unicode strings themselves. Another way you could do this is here we have emphasis tags around a variable. So why don't we make our code a little bit more complicated to take those emphasis tags out of the translation string and put them into the dot format string. So that's making, the dot format stanzas a little bit more complicated, but what we're passing to translators is very clear. Another way is to just make the phrase itself its own variable and then just shove that translated phrase into where you need it. Don't leave order to chance. And you have an asterisk at the end of a phrase because it's in your login form and that asterisk means that it's required. And what are you going to do? Your ask translators, please leave the asterisk at the end, but how are you going to enforce that? You're going to look through every locale file and make sure every instance of the string appends an asterisk? I mean, that's a little crazy when you can just do something like modify your CSS or just append the asterisk directly to the result from ugettext. Try to keep your strings constant. Every time you change a string, it's going to result in a new entry in your .po file. And that can be something as stupid as you change some punctuation, you capitalize or you lowercase a phrase. And so if you keep your changes to a minimum, your translators will have to do less work. And you can get around this creatively in Python too. If you have a string, the lower login, and you need that L to be uppercase, then just call .capitalize on the result from getText. In general, when dealing with open source, crowdsourced translations, your engineering team should take the hit for the sake of the translators. If the strings you're passing to the translators are super clear, have a lot of context, and don't have a bunch of crazy code and markup in them, your translators are going to have a good time translating. They're going to produce higher quality translations, and they're going to keep coming back. Just like if you have a code base that's really crazy and you have no outreach to open source community members, your open source community won't grow, similarly to your translation community. A couple of extra things that I just want to touch on briefly, but you're going to have to consider as you walk down the road of internationalizing and localizing your site. So non-Latin characters may be taller and wider than Latin characters. German and Dutch can have these extremely long words that are unbroken with no spaces. Arabic, Hebrew, Urdu, Farsi are right to left. So what does all this mean? Find yourself a good UX designer and talk to them about responsive design and a layout grid management system. If you are using Sass, there's an excellent mixin that we use at edX called ByApp. It allows you to indicate positional variables left and right, that these are positional variables, and at compile time, 2 separate sets of Sass are compiled that can be switched based on the language the user is requesting. We use a Thoughtbot product called NeatGrid to do our grid layout. Don't forget dates and numbers. Dates and numbers need to be localized as well, and there are a lot of different ways to do this. And if you're a very large project or you're a commercial project, a couple of recommendations that I have is, one, to hire a localization manager. A localization manager can help you keep all of this straight. And 2 is to pay for translation services. At edX, we've paid for a bit of translation services, and I've been really impressed with the results. People who are translators as a professional career really have a deeper understanding of the technical ins and outs of what websites are asking users to do, can suggest better translations, and can point out issues that you may have with your strings that are marked for translations. A couple of resources I encourage you to check out. If you haven't seen Ned Batchelder's talk on the Unicode sandwich, you should before you start this journey, because I promise you that as soon as you start localizing your website, you're going to end up with a ton of Unicode errors. And understanding the whole Unicode whatchamacallit is really important. We've written a lot of comprehensive guidelines about internationalization for edX. I strongly recommend that you check it out. And the slides from this presentation are available at sarina.github.io. Sorry that I probably talked really fast, but thank you for being a great audience, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Sarina. Anybody has any questions? That was amazing.
So one thing that was a food for thought, I came from a background where it's not really a web app testing. So the narrow screen on a smartphone is going to be very problematic for languages like Dutch or German. A lot of times they will translate the word because they have no visual context of how the word appears. They will translate it way too long, and we'll have to send them back and tell them to retranslate it. The other thing that that was interesting that you mentioned different heights for example, for Chinese or for German length. The one that was the trickiest was Thai, because it was variable height. And
Thank you.
that was really, really tricky.
Yeah, definitely. I actually had Thai on the slide before, but I didn't know anybody who could speak Thai to give me a phrase in Thai that wasn't offensive. So I ended up going with Chinese for that slide.
Hi, Sarina. Thanks a lot for a great talk. I have a couple of questions. So one is, did you ever have to deal with dynamic translation? So for text that you did not pre-translate? You know, it's like using a fuzzy translator or something, so you had to...
Oh, so wait, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, sorry.
So what I mean is, did you ever have to localize or internationalize for dynamic content?
For dynamic content. No, right now all of the content that we're localizing is static content. We're looking into dynamic content, and TransFX has a JavaScript plugin that allows you to, it scrapes the pages on your site and actually gives translators the page as it's rendered, and they can translate different blocks. So we're looking to that as one of many options for dynamic content.
Okay. And you mentioned TransFX, is that it? So so if your site is not publicly available, can you just send them messages and they would translate that? How does that work?
So for TransFX, if you are not an open source site, you cannot get a free account. So you have to pay for an account if you're closed source, and I'm not really sure how that works. There are a lot of different translation websites out there, and there are actually some really great ones that are domain specific. So if you have like videos, for example, Amara is a great platform. We just chose TransFX particularly because as an open source project, and we weren't going to present translations on our website yet, we were really interested in that free account.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
And thank you very much.
Hi, sorry. I don't know if you guys have any experience with this at edX. I was wondering about the tools perhaps that you might use for where the logic is client-side, and so you have to have the translations client-side as well, like in JavaScript.
I'm not sure that, so the question is how do we deal with client-side translations, and we haven't had to deal with that. All of the code we translate is in templates, JavaScript, and Python code.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
As far as the internationalization side goes, do you have any recommendations or first steps for an already existing large multi-module application?
That's a good question. I would probably say the largest bang for your buck is to start with your most visible pages and start marking up for internationalization. There's a lot of people in other countries who have a ton of experience with this, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank a bunch of engineers at Tsinghua University and a few other universities in China who've really helped us shore up our internationalization. Because as Chinese users using code that's mostly written in English, they have a lot more experience with internationalization than a lot of us do. But if you can make it a push with your community, we're looking to internationalize our site, and here's our plan, here are the modules we want to attack first. I wouldn't be surprised if people got really excited about that and could help you out.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for your talk. So any project that I do, I have to support at least two languages, Arabic and English. And I just want to know what is the rule of thumb for supporting RTL and left-to-right languages on the same template?
That's a good question. How do you support both left-to-right and right-to-left languages within your code base? So what we do at edX is that we use Sass. It's pretty robust and we have everything laid out on a grid. And when we define things as being on the left side of the site or the right side of the site, we use that mix that I was talking about, by app Sass. And so if you have a rule that is like margin : left, instead you do margin @include left. And when in your compilation process, this is the part I'm not really sure how it works, but in your compilation process for your Sass, instead of compiling one set of Sass, BiApp steps in, and anytime it sees one of those rules, it will compile it either as left or as right, depending on if it's compiling the left to right or the right to left Sass. So now you have two sets of Sass in your application, and there's ways to make sure that when your user selects English or Arabic, the different set of Sass file is chosen, and it's all very seamless. And I can show you it if you want to see afterwards.
Thanks a lot.
Great talk, thank you. Could you recommend tools or libraries for those who don't use Django?
So gettext is actually based off of the Django translation library is like a very thin wrapper with just a couple of additional functionalities over Python's gettext library. So gettext is in Python itself. Moreover, the Python gettext is based on the GNU gettext. So it's all of these very standard libraries that are defined not just in Python, but across all platforms. So depending on whatever, if you're using a web framework, they may have a translation module that you can import, but the syntax I would expect to be roughly the same as what Django is doing because it's based on the Python ones.
Great, thanks.
Karina, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was great. And lightning talks are now downstairs in 517 A and B.